What if you were swallowed by a whale? You open your eyes and you're inside a whale. The first thing you notice is darkness so complete you can't see your own hands. The second thing is the smell, overwhelming, nauseating, a mixture of rotting fish, stomach acid, and something organic and foul that you can't quite identify. The third thing is the heat and humidity, oppressive and suffocating, making every breath feel like you're drowning in warm, fetid air. And the fourth thing, the thing that makes your stomach drop with pure terror, is the realization that the walls around you are moving, pulsing, contracting, squeezing, and you're being pushed deeper into something that your mind can barely comprehend. You're inside one of the largest creatures on Earth. The walls pressing against you are flesh. The liquid soaking your clothes is digestive fluid. The darkness is absolute because there is no light inside a living creature's body. You're trapped in a space that was never meant to contain a human being, and every instinct is screaming that you need to get out. But there is no out. There is only deeper. Welcome to the nightmare scenario that's fascinated and terrified humans for centuries, being swallowed whole by a whale. From the biblical story of Jonah to more recent claims of sailors surviving inside these ocean giants, the idea persists that a human could somehow be swallowed by a whale and live to tell the tale. But what would actually happen if you found yourself in this situation? Could you survive? And more importantly, what would you experience in those final moments before the inevitable end? Hey, before we explore the terrifying reality of what happens when a whale swallows a human, the biology, the famous stories, and the brutal truth, like and subscribe for more examinations of scenarios that seem possible until you look at the science. Now let's talk about what being swallowed by a whale actually means, and why the reality is far worse than any legend suggests. The anatomy problem, which whales could even swallow you. Not all whales are created equal when it comes to the theoretical possibility of swallowing a human whole. The vast majority of whale species couldn't do it even if they wanted to, simply because of how their bodies are built. Blue whales are the largest animals ever to exist on Earth. A single blue whale's tongue weighs as much as an elephant. Its mouth is large enough to hold 400 to 500 people if they were packed in. Looking at those numbers, you'd think a blue whale could easily swallow a human. But there's a critical problem: the throat. Blue whales are baleen whales. Instead of teeth, they have baleen plates, long fringe structures that hang from their upper jaws and act as filters. They feed by taking in enormous mouthfuls of water containing thousands of small fish or krill, then forcing the water back out through the baleen while trapping the food inside. It's an efficient system for eating tons of tiny creatures, but it comes with a limitation. Their throats are surprisingly small. A blue whale's throat is only about 10 to 15 centimeters in diameter, roughly the size of a grapefruit or a small dinner plate. This is wide enough for krill and small fish to pass through, but far too narrow for a human body. Even a child couldn't fit through a blue whale's throat. The whale could take you into its mouth, but it physically couldn't swallow you. You'd be held there briefly, probably terrified and confused, before the whale expelled you back into the ocean along with the water it was filtering. The same limitation applies to most baleen whale species: humpbacks, gray whales, right whales. They're massive creatures with enormous mouths, but relatively small throats designed for filter feeding, not for swallowing large objects or creatures. That leaves the toothed whales, and among these only one species is realistically large enough to swallow an adult human whole: the sperm whale. Sperm whales are the largest toothed predators on Earth. Adult males can reach lengths of 50 to 60 feet and weigh up to 45 tons. Unlike baleen whales, sperm whales hunt large prey, primarily giant squid, which they hunt in the deep ocean, sometimes diving to depths of over 2,000 meters. To eat prey that large, they need throats that can accommodate substantial objects. A sperm whale's throat is estimated to be about 30 to 40 centimeters in diameter. Still not huge, but potentially wide enough for a human body to pass through, especially if the person was compressed or positioned correctly. The whale's esophagus is designed to expand somewhat to accommodate large chunks of squid, and theoretically, a human could fit through this passage. This is why almost all the historical accounts of people being swallowed by whales involve sperm whales specifically. They're the only whales with the right combination of size, throat diameter, and feeding behavior to make swallowing a human even remotely possible. But possible doesn't mean survivable. And the anatomy that would allow a sperm whale to swallow you is the same anatomy that would make the experience absolutely horrific. The famous story, James Bartley and the tail that won't die. In 1891, a story began circulating that would become one of the most famous whale tales in history, second only to the biblical story of Jonah. According to the account, a whaling ship named the Star of the East was hunting sperm whales near the Falkland Islands when one of the whales attacked, capsizing a small whaling boat and throwing the crew into the water. The crew members were rescued, but one man, James Bartley, was missing. The crew assumed he had drowned. However, the following day they succeeded in killing the whale and brought it alongside the ship to harvest the valuable whale oil and other products. As they began the process of cutting open the massive carcass, they noticed something moving inside the whale's stomach. When they cut open the stomach, they found James Bartley alive but unconscious. According to the story, Bartley had spent approximately 15 to 18 hours inside the whale. When he finally regained consciousness several weeks later, he was changed. His face, neck, and hands were bleached a ghostly white, supposedly from exposure to the whale's stomach acid. He was also reportedly blind, again attributed to the acid. The story claimed that Bartley eventually recovered enough to return to work, though he never fully recovered his previous appearance or health, and he remained marked by his ordeal for the rest of his life. The story was repeated in newspapers, included in books about whaling, and became a favorite tale of preachers who saw it as proof that the biblical story of Jonah could have been literally true. Here was modern evidence that a man could be swallowed by a whale and survive. There's just one problem. It almost certainly never happened. Researchers who investigated the story in the 20th century found numerous inconsistencies and problems. The ship's logs from the Star of the East, when they could be located, made no mention of anyone being swallowed by a whale. Historians found no contemporary newspaper accounts from 1891 reporting such an extraordinary event. Strange for something that would have been sensational news if it had occurred. Most tellingly, the ship's records showed no crew member named James Bartley on board during the relevant time period. When investigators contacted the wife of the ship's captain, she stated flatly that no such incident had ever occurred on her husband's ship. The story, she said, was completely fabricated. But even if we set aside the historical evidence against the story and examine it purely from a biological and medical standpoint, the account falls apart. The conditions inside a whale's digestive system would make survival for 15 to 18 hours essentially impossible. And if someone did somehow survive, the effects would be far more severe than white skin and blindness. And what would really happen? The descent into biological hell. If a person were actually swallowed by a sperm whale, the experience would be a cascade of trauma, each stage worse than the last, culminating in death within minutes, rather than the hours or days suggested by the Bartley story. The first obstacle would be the teeth. Sperm whales have 40 to 50 cone-shaped teeth in their lower jaw, each one approximately 20 centimeters long, about the length of a chef's knife. The upper jaw has sockets that these teeth fit into, but typically no functional teeth of its own. The whale uses these teeth primarily to grip struggling prey like giant squid rather than to chew. If the whale closed its jaws around a person, the teeth would likely cause severe lacerations and puncture wounds. The person might be impaled on multiple teeth simultaneously. The pressure of the whale's bite, difficult to measure precisely but estimated to be substantial given the size of prey they handle, could crush bones, particularly ribs, causing internal injuries and potentially puncturing lungs. However, sperm whales don't typically bite and chew their prey into small pieces. They grip it and swallow it relatively whole, often swallowing giant squid that are 10 to 15 meters long in large sections. So if a person were in the whale's mouth, they might pass between or around the teeth rather than being bitten directly, especially if the whale was moving quickly or if the person was taken in along with water during a feeding attempt. Assuming the person made it past the teeth without fatal injuries, the next stage would be the throat. The esophagus of a sperm whale is dark, muscular, and lined with mucus. The person would be pushed down by powerful muscular contractions called peristalsis, the same process that moves food down any animal's throat, but on a massive scale. The passage would be tight, dark, and suffocating. The person would have no control over their movement, being squeezed and pushed downward by muscles designed to move objects weighing hundreds of pounds. The temperature would rise as they descended. Whale body temperature is similar to human body temperature, around 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. But inside the confined space of the throat with no air circulation, it would feel much hotter. Breathing would become extremely difficult or impossible. The air in the throat would be depleted of oxygen and increasingly filled with carbon dioxide from the person's own breathing, along with methane and other gases from the whale's digestive system. The person would begin to suffocate within a minute or two. The throat passage to the stomach takes anywhere from several seconds to a minute or more, depending on the size of what's being swallowed. For a struggling, panicking human, the journey would feel endless, a claustrophobic nightmare of darkness, heat, pressure, and oxygen deprivation. Then comes the drop into the first stomach. Sperm whales, like many whales and other cetaceans, have a multi-chambered stomach system, typically 4 distinct stomach compartments, each serving a different function in the digestive process. The first stomach is the largest and acts as a storage chamber where food begins to be broken down. When the person dropped into this first stomach, they would land in a pool of digestive fluids mixed with partially digested food, likely chunks of squid in various stages of decomposition. The smell would be overwhelming. The liquid would be acidic enough to begin burning exposed skin immediately, though the effect wouldn't be instant like dropping into pure acid. Stomach acid takes time to cause severe chemical burns, but the person would begin to feel burning sensations on any exposed skin. In the eyes if they were open, and in the mouth and throat if they gasped or swallowed any of the fluid. The temperature in the stomach would be maintained at the whale's body temperature, but the humidity would be near 100%. Combined with the lack of fresh air, this would make breathing, if the person was still breathing at this point, feel like drowning in hot, acidic steam. The person would likely be unconscious by now from oxygen deprivation. The human brain can survive only about 4 to 6 minutes without oxygen before irreversible damage begins. Given that oxygen would have been depleted in the throat, most people would lose consciousness before even reaching the stomach, and would die of suffocation within 5 to 10 minutes of being swallowed. But even if someone somehow maintained consciousness, perhaps if they had taken a deep breath before being swallowed and held it through the throat passage, the conditions in the stomach would ensure death fairly quickly. The combination of acid exposure, lack of oxygen, heat, and toxic gas buildup would cause death within 15 to 30 minutes at the absolute maximum. The body would then begin the process of being digested. The stomach acids would continue to break down tissues. The person would be moved from the first stomach to the second, third, and fourth chambers, each one continuing the digestive process. Eventually, what remained would be expelled from the whale's body as waste, primarily bones and perhaps some indigestible materials like clothing fibers or metal objects. The entire process from swallowing to excretion would take anywhere from several hours to a few days, depending on various factors. But the person would be dead within the first few minutes, long before the worst of the digestive process occurred. Why whales don't eat humans? Evolution and preference. The good news, if there is any good news in this scenario, is that whales have absolutely no interest in eating humans. We're not on their menu, never have been, and never will be. Understanding why requires looking at how whales evolved and what they're adapted to eat. Baleen whales evolved to be filter feeders, specializing in tiny prey consumed in massive quantities. A blue whale might eat 4 to 6 tons of krill per day during feeding season. Krill are tiny shrimp-like creatures that swarm in enormous dense clouds in the ocean. The whale swims through these clouds with its mouth open, takes in thousands of liters of water containing millions of krill, then filters out the water and swallows the krill. The system is incredibly efficient for eating small prey in bulk, but it's completely unsuited for eating large individual prey items like humans. Even if a baleen whale accidentally took a human into its mouth while feeding, the whale would immediately recognize that something was wrong. The object is too large, doesn't taste right, isn't what the whale's biology expects, and would spit it out along with the water. Toothed whales like sperm whales evolved to hunt large individual prey in the deep ocean. Sperm whales primarily eat squid, including giant squid and colossal squid that can be 10 to 15 meters long and weigh hundreds of pounds. They dive to depths of 1,000 to 2,000 meters or more to find these squid, using echolocation to hunt in complete darkness. Their digestive systems, their hunting strategies, their entire biology is optimized for this specific prey. They don't hunt near the surface where humans would be encountered. They don't hunt warm-blooded mammals. They don't have any evolutionary programming that would make them interested in eating a human. The documented cases of whales interacting with humans in ways that might seem aggressive are almost always accidents or defensive behavior, not predation. A humpback whale that surfaces under a kayak isn't trying to eat the kayaker, it's surfacing to breathe or feed, and didn't notice the tiny boat above it. A whale that strikes a boat with its tail is typically either startled or defending itself, not attacking. In fact, there's substantial evidence that whales are often careful around humans. Whale-watching guides report that whales seem aware of nearby boats and often adjust their behavior to avoid collisions. Divers who encounter whales describe the animals as curious but gentle, often seeming careful not to accidentally harm the much smaller humans. The idea of being swallowed by a whale captures our imagination precisely because it's so alien to our normal experience and so contrary to how whales actually behave. We're afraid of being eaten by large predators. It's a primal fear that made sense when our ancestors faced actual predation threats. Whales are massive, powerful animals that could easily kill us if they wanted to. But they don't want to. We're not food to them. We're not even interesting to them most of the time. The real dangers from whales come from accidental collisions, being hit by a whale's tail or flipper, being caught under a breaching whale, being in a boat that a whale surfaces under. These accidents happen occasionally and can be fatal, but they're not predation. They're the equivalent of a human accidentally stepping on an insect. The human didn't mean to kill the insect, wasn't trying to eat it, barely noticed it was there. Conclusion: the nightmare that won't happen. Being swallowed by a whale is a scenario that exists in our fears and stories, but has almost no basis in reality. The anatomy of most whales makes it impossible. The hunting behavior of the one species that could theoretically swallow a human makes it extraordinarily unlikely they would ever try. And if it somehow did happen, survival would be measured in minutes at most, not the hours or days suggested by the Bartley legend. James Bartley's story persists because we want to believe it's possible. We want to believe that nature, even at its most terrible, might still allow for miraculous survival. We want the biblical story of Jonah to have some basis in reality. We want there to be escape even from situations that seem absolutely hopeless. But the biological reality is clear. If you were swallowed by a whale, you would die quickly from suffocation, likely losing consciousness within a minute or two and dying within 5 to 10 minutes. The experience would be terrifying, claustrophobic, and mercifully brief. There would be no dramatic rescue, no weeks of recovery, no living to tell the tale. The ocean is full of real dangers that are worth understanding and respecting. Rip currents, jellyfish stings, shark encounters in rare circumstances, dangerous weather, equipment failures. These are the actual risks that people face in the ocean. Being swallowed by a whale isn't on that list and never has been. If you enjoyed this examination of what would really happen if a whale swallowed you, the biology, the famous hoax, and the reality that's both better and worse than the legend, subscribe for more deep dives into scenarios that seem plausible until you examine the science. The nightmare of being swallowed by a whale is just that, a nightmare, not a realistic danger. Whales aren't interested in eating us, couldn't swallow most of us even if they tried, and the one species that theoretically could would never want to. Sleep easy. The ocean has plenty of real things to worry about, but being eaten by a whale isn't one of them.